Up next, we're going to have Kim Waters, one of our own, and she's going to tell us about Gullah Geechee in cyberspace, the linguistic landscape of an unwritten language.
Thank you. Okay. Technical difficulties? Anybody got an idea about why this isn't working? It's on VGA, right? Or should it be HDMI? No, it's this
No,
one.
it's
It's that
the
one.
VGA.
Yeah. Projector's on.
I'm not sure. Are you sure? Like, you don't have to do anything on your computer?
Well, no, this should come, I mean,
How many chefs to ruin the stew?
I know, indeed. Well, I mean, there's something should be up there.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to suggest is something there.
Yeah, but I just don't, Okay, Plan B, I will take it to, I'll email it, and I'll use that.
The computer.
But now I got
You have the swirly Jeff.
the rainbow swirl.
Let me make sure this.
Is it not working?
No.
It should be, oh, there, no, that's not me. I don't know why this doesn't work. I think it might be this connection, because I use this all the time and it normally works.
If you want, we can try my adapter.
Now that is not the HDMI. This is the HDMI. Is it possible that
Well, yeah, but this is the one I have the adapter for.
Right,
right.
Which is that one, right?
VGA, yes, that's what it should be.
Okay, I'm gonna email this to myself and,
We should be okay. Just
take that out.
Because, you know, in case you want to use my adapter as well, I can give it to you.
Did yours work
Yeah.
with this? Okay, well, if you
can
wouldn't
try.
mind, that might be expeditious.
Sometimes you need to change the resolution as well, otherwise it cannot work. It was the case in mine.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's,
Wait a moment. Now this.
oh, there we go. Thank you.
Was it just the adapter?
Apparently.
Is it working?
Yeah. Yeah, there we go. Thank you. Well, after a false start there, good morning. As a Georgia native, I've heard what most people know as Gullah spoken since I was a child. And it's been misunderstood, it's been marginalized and dismissed as broken English, but no longer. We now understand Gullah's roots, we now understand that it's not broken English, and we no longer have it at the margins of linguistic interest. It's actually a linguistic jewel here right on our back doorsteps. So today I'm actually sharing information from two projects. One I'll call Phase 1, which turned out to prove my null hypothesis, and the other Phase 2. For those of you who aren't familiar with Gullah Geechee, it's primarily an unwritten language. It's the last surviving English-based Creole in North America, and arose in contact situations between where blacks who were here to work on the plantations were a minority, or were the majority of the population. And it creolized with colonial varieties of English, Arabic, and over 30 African languages. The contact varieties of English that creolized with Gullah include Irish, Scots, and Welsh, as well as nautical jargon. Turner was the first in 1949 to make the connection between Gullah Geechee and the African dialects. He was the first he banished that notion that it's merely broken English by establishing links with Niger-Congo languages. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the idea of the triangular slave trade, the terms Gullah and Geechee come from tribes in West Africa, the Gullah tribe and the Geechee tribe. And those terms have now come to mean not only the people and the language, or rather not only the language, but the people and their culture. So this is the geography of part of where Gullah Geechee is spoken, along the coastal areas of North and South Carolina and into North Florida as well as Georgia. You'll see St. Helena Island there. That's the island where I went to do phase 1 of the study and look to see what evidence I could find of Gullah Geechee in public space there. It's interesting to note that a language that was being misunderstood as late as the 1930s was relatively recently recognized by Congress, by the U.S. Congress, when it implemented the idea of the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor, which runs from Wilmington, North Carolina in the north down to Jacksonville, Florida. Through my interactions in the community, I've come to understand that there are about 5 dialects that the people self-identify: Gullah, saltwater, freshwater, and outland. And then 2 dialects of Geechee, one from Charleston, South Carolina, and then the dialect that's spoken in Georgia. And you may ask why we use the conjoined term Gullah Geechee, and the short answer is for political correctness. There's a historical distrust of outsiders, especially academics in the community, and you may have heard the term Sea Island Creole, which is an academic coinage. The community members don't use that. For one thing, there's a broader distribution than just the Sea Islands of Georgia and South Carolina. Another is that term Gullah Geechee maintains the cultural link to Africa, which is important in the culture. It also is maximally inclusive for those who self-identify as Geechee. And the language is a big source of resurgence and pride in the Gullah Geechee communities. And it's also the way the members of the community self-identify, so that's why I use that term as well. Sometimes the language goes faster than the printing of banners, so even at this banner that was at the Cultural Heritage Parade last year, they're still using the term Gullah, which was in front of all of the flags from the African nations. The dominant African languages among the Creole are Yoruba, Igbo, and Efik and Twi. But you can see there's a lot of other influences there as well. Now, moving from the history and background into the framework that I used for phase 1, the Linguistic Landscape framework was developed over the last 20 years as a passive method to examine language use and document language change, primarily in either bilingual or multilingual environments. Bell says that the linguistic landscape links place, language, and includes the role of space in language change, in other words, geography. Landry observes that the linguistic landscapes describe the visibility and salience of language on public and commercial signs in a given region. And Bolton talks about the patterning of the built environment in terms of the place names and the street names and that sort of thing. And finally, Gortner talks about the unit of analysis when one is working with linguistic landscapes. And it's any piece of text that's within a spatially definable frame. So for the purposes of what I was looking at, Gortner noted that linguistic landscapes can be anything from graffiti on walls to slogans on apparel. So for the phase 1 process, I was interested in seeing how, given the negative stereotypes over the last 50 years and the fear of outsiders or resistance to outsiders, to see how the language might have changed, the usage might have changed over the last 50 years. So I adopted this linguistic landscape framework. And I was interested to see, first of all, if Gullah Geechee was used in public space, and if so, where and how. So I went to St. Helena during the annual homecoming last year, and my intent was to make photographs of any Gullah Geechee text that I saw in the parade that was the focus of the event. Looking at the clothing, the placards that people were carrying in the parades, signs on the floats, banners, flags, and that sort of thing. What I found was absolutely nothing. Everything was in English, except for this one perhaps mysterious word, weebie. This t-shirt you see here is a photograph I took of a woman who was representing a community organization that recycled books and redistributed to other families. And we'll talk more about what that means in a moment. But since I didn't find any Gullah Geechee in the real landscape, I thought it might be interesting to go into cyberspace and see what was going on there. But before we talk about that, I want to tell you a little bit about what has been actually written in Gullah. There are a few texts. Most people are familiar with the term Gullah, perhaps through Uncle Remus. Georgia Hall of Fame writer Joel Chandler Harris wrote these didactic animal stories based on oral histories that he heard while working as a printer's devil in a plantation in Eatonton, Georgia. You may also have heard of Porgy or Porgy and Bess. It was originally written as a novel in 1925 and later made into a very famous folk opera by Gershwin. And then this little lady at the bottom here, Ms. Virginia Mixon Garrity, who was a native of South Carolina and loved the Gullah people and their language, translated the play and the libretto into Gullah and has mounted productions of those. She also wrote a Gullah cookbook and a Gullah dictionary. She grew up with a Gullah nanny in Charleston, and that's how she came to be around the language. The first work that was ever really put together with, or that has been put together with informants from the community is the New Testament, which was translated and published in 2005. It was about 30 years, a 30-year-long effort. So pre-internet, we had 4 Gullah Geechee texts, and now we have a new method of a new medium for analysis. We have the internet, and along with the internet came the explosion of social media. We have blogs, of course. In 1999, there were 23 blogs, and in 2006, there are over 50 million. And so what we're seeing now is this explosion of Gullah Geechee text being used on Facebook, on Twitter, and it's become the de facto method for language propagation for this particular language, and I'm sure there are others as well. So we have this Gullah diaspora, people spread all over the world, all over the country, but through Wi-Fi now they can have access to their heritage language. The first Facebook post was in 2009, as I said. It was with text that accompanied pictures of the coast and the lighthouse and various beach scenes. And it essentially was representing the way that the land looks, that the Gullah people consider to be their homeland. From dawn to dusk, the children come here, and where the marsh where the river flows, and the island where the Gullah Geechee people go. Where the lighthouse stands, that's what it's there for, to take you back to Africa, which I thought was really interesting. So, what counts as cyber data in the linguistic landscape? I looked at tweets, I looked at Facebook, I looked at blogs, I looked at web pages from various areas, and also looked at government sites and South Carolina and Georgia historical sites. And what I was looking for was to see how and to what ends this secret language is being used in this very public place on the internet, and what can we learn about the culture. We're going to focus on the former one here today. So, as I've said, it's primarily an unwritten language, but it's being used in cyberspace. It's fairly straightforward. Spelling's not fixed, but it's orthographically very transparent. Grapheme to morpheme correspondence is transparent, uses the Roman alphabet and practical, spell it like it sounds orthography. Compared to English, it's very straightforward, except for one thing. It's extensive use of metaphor, which intentionally damps intelligibility and facilitates its use as a cryptolect. So a couple of the phrases that are very popular in Gullah are, ooh, he crack he teeth, which means he's a talker, he cracks his teeth. And he diggin' he grave, which means he eats too much, his teeth are digging his grave. So if you don't know those metaphors, it's very hard to figure out what's being said. And we talk about this as the rebel time language because the Gullah Geechee elders talk about the period of slavery as the rebel time. It's something equivalent to how Cockney rhyming slang is used in London. So as far as results go for the second project, all of the sites that I look at, I've provided representative samples here. I haven't shown you every example, but the examples show that language maintenance, language exposure, and language propagation are the main ways that Gullah is currently, and Geechee currently being used on the internet. And we're back to the WeBe example here. This is kind of a, how would we say this? A cultural identifier, WeBe. It connotes this is who we have been, this is who we are, and this is who we will be. It's comes up again and again and again on various Gullah Geechee oriented websites. A post on the Gullah Geechee Nation webpage, I know you can't read this, but the post says that my family's from Walterboro. He's talking about where his family has been. He wants to know the possibility of whether he's Geechee or not. He says from the time he was very young, he was called Geechee Boy. And the response is, you know, for sure you're one of us if you're from this place. This is one of our places. And then there's some factual information about Gullah Geechee Heritage Week, and then a complimentary closing in Gullah as well. We have a notice from New York City from a Gullah Geechee event with factual information in English followed by text in Gullah. And here's the public notice. We glad to hunna chillin, come for help when we get the truth out. So they're saying, you know, come and help us understand who we are. And then this was really interesting. I spent a lot of time this summer thinking about cultural appropriation, and this particular website looks like it's going to be something about education, but it actually turns out to be a South Carolina realty leasing website where they're showing beaches and all this high-end community stuff, luring you in with the enticement of learning about the Gullah Geechee language, but then you see these pictures of they're all white patrons. So I'm not sure that that's part of what is causing trouble with the community and how their language is being used. I did look at several government websites, as I mentioned, and there were mentions of Gullah and Geechee, both South Carolina and Georgia government websites, and as well as the National Park Service, but all of the text there is in English. There's nothing in Gullah Geechee dialect. Okay, so we know language endangerment is an issue with minority languages, but now because of the contact, especially with one of the killer languages, English, but with this cyber revitalization, David Harrison wrote that technology should not be seen as a threat to language, but rather as an enabler, that the lowly text message may lift obscure tongues to new levels of prestige. And we are seeing this with Cherokee, Irish, Maori, and others. There are keyboard overlays. There's Navajo pop music and Tutuhil rap music on YouTube and tweets and blogs. So we are really seeing a resurgence of minority languages being used in cyberspace. And Gullah Geechee is right in there. There are many different entities who are using the internet as a tool for language propagation. And so finally, what I'd like to leave you with is that the good news is that Gullah Geechee is establishing a beachhead on the internet, websites for cultural as well as historical organizations, cultural, social groups and clubs, all have Facebook presence. And even though it's an in-group dialect, it's still being used, commingled with English to propagate the language. Personal things tend to be communicated in Gullah Geechee, facilitating a solidarity, calls to action, exhibiting values for the culture. And it's very similar things are going on with other minority languages like Cherokee and Ojibwe and others. So propagation is the key. That's the idea that you can keep the language going in communities that aren't contiguous but have access to Wi-Fi. Lots of other opportunities to happen here, from analysis of variation among the dialects to corpus building. A more academic dictionary would be a wonderful idea. A cybertext analysis, a diachronic study, real versus cyber usage, documentation of situational use as a cryptolect, which I think is a fascinating prospect, as well as Turner's pursuit of Turner's description of prosody. He said that was the most distinguishing characteristic of Gullah, and there were 8 patterns that he noted that are quite different from English. Okay, so references here, and I'd like to leave you with, well, first of all, I'd like to thank my committee, Dr. Renwick, Dr. Chamorro, and Dr. Howe for all the help and guidance that they've given me. And this is Dr. Turner with his recording machine in Africa in 1952. And finally, these are some famous people who have Gullah Geechee heritage. You may recognize Clarence Thomas, who's the Associate Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Chubby Checker, rock and roll star. Joseph Rainey, who was the first African American to serve in the House of Representatives. Our First Lady, Michelle Obama. Darius Rucker, who's a songwriter, singer-songwriter, who formerly was in Hootie and the Blowfish. And Jim Brown, who was has been called the greatest professional athlete in United States history. Michael Jordan, of course, no introduction needed there. Joe Frazier, who was an Olympic gold medalist, as well as world champion boxer. And finally, Ron Days, who had a TV show called Gullah Gullah Island, which was based on his life growing up on St. Helena. So now I'll be happy to take your questions.
Unfortunately, we don't have a whole
Too much time. Yeah, we got like 2 minutes for questions.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anything I can answer for you quickly? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Great talk.
Thank you.
You said at the beginning that there were 5 dialects of Gullah.
Yes.
Do you know what are the bases for that identification?
Yes. Where they started out geographically, where the people that settled the community started out geographically, the Sea Island dialect was the people who were originally living on the islands. And then they moved upriver to live and fish along the rivers, and that population had another dialect. And then after the end of the Civil War, you may remember Field Order Number 15, which General Sherman issued, which allowed every freedman 40 acres and a mule, and so that's that 30-mile inland corridor. And then because I think Savannah or Charleston was a center of the import of the auctions for enslaved people, there's a specific dialect that's associated with the city of Charleston. And then the people who live in Georgia are considered to have a very different dialect. And that's my next project, is to look at those dialects and see what the variation is among them. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes?
I find it interesting that the internet came as the rescue here, because
Yes.
I've worked a lot with Low German, endangered language in Germany.
Yes.
And speakers of Low German see the internet, especially social media, as the killer.
As a killer, really?
Because everything is in English or High German, and they see that as a real threat to their language.
Well, and I think it could go either way. If the culture or the communities who use those dialects can embrace the internet and start doing community outreach, because a lot of what I see is promotions for festivals and homecoming events and arts and
There are
that
blogs
sort of
in
thing.
Gullah Geechee.
Yes, there are, but it's all mixed. I mean, it's like the people who are blogging are trying to educate the people that they want to recruit, right? So if you don't speak the language already, they don't want to shut you out. They want to give you a context for what's being said. And so I think it can go either way. The Cherokee is another group that's done a wonderful job. You know, they have they worked with Steve Jobs to get the Cherokee syllabary on iPhones before when they first came out, so the kids could start tweeting using the syllabary. So the extent to which people embrace the technology instead of eschew it, you know, it's kind of a philosophical perspective. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. We're going to have to move on to our plenary speaker, Dr.
Thank you.
Batista.
All right.